Courtroom 302 was filled with tense silence as the judge slammed the gavel down, signaling the end of the trial. Everyone in the room turned their eyes to Olivia, the 16-year-old girl at the center of the courtroom. She stood up, her heart pounding in her chest as she faced the two people who had given her life, the parents she had never known until now. Her hands were shaking, and her breath was shallow, but she was determined. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor," the judge said, turning toward Olivia's biological parents, who sat across the room. "Your daughter has something she would like to say to you." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Olivia's eyes met her biological mother's, and her father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They had no idea what was coming. Olivia took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice cracked at first, but she forced the words out. "I know you gave me up for adoption," Olivia began, her eyes fixed on the Taylors, who had a mix of guilt and disbelief on their faces. "But I need to know why you left me. I need to know why you didn't even try to keep me. You gave up your daughter for nothing." The room was so still, you could almost hear everyone holding their breath. Olivia's words echoed through the courtroom, each one hitting harder than the last. Mr. Taylor opened his mouth as if to speak, but his words caught in his throat. Mrs. Taylor, on the other hand, simply looked down, avoiding Olivia's gaze. Olivia wasn't about to let them get away with silence. She wasn't a little girl anymore, too afraid to ask questions. She was someone who had lived with pain and confusion for too long, and now she wanted answers. "You didn't even want to be a part of my life," Olivia shouted, her voice filled with raw emotion. "I was just some mistake you wanted to forget. Well, I'm not going anywhere. You can't just walk away from your own flesh and blood and pretend nothing ever happened." The courtroom gasped. The judge shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the rising tension. Mr. Taylor finally stood, his face pale. "Olivia, please." Mr. Taylor began, his voice trembling. "You don't understand. It wasn't what you think." Before he could finish, Olivia cut him off. "Don't lie to me. Don't you dare lie to me now." She turned to the judge, her eyes wild. "You have no idea what it's been like to grow up feeling abandoned, alone, and unloved." And just like that, the truth hung in the air. Everyone was waiting for the next move, wondering what would happen next. The Taylors seemed paralyzed with shock, unable to react to the force of Olivia's words. Then, as the judge raised his gavel to restore order, a loud noise rang out from the back of the courtroom. The doors to the courtroom burst open, and a figure rushed in, causing everyone to turn. Olivia's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the person who had just entered, the one person she hadn't expected to see today. It was her adoptive mother, Diane. But what was she doing here? And why was she looking at Olivia with such fear in her eyes? The courtroom fell silent once again. Diane's face was pale, and her eyes were filled with something Olivia couldn't quite place. The shock on Diane's face mirrored the disbelief on the Taylors. Diane had never been one to show up uninvited, let alone interrupt a court session. Diane stepped forward slowly, her eyes locked on Olivia's. "You need to stop," Diane whispered, her voice barely audible over the tension in the room. "You don't know the full story." Olivia's head spun. What was Diane talking about? What did she mean by that? Diane had been her mother since she was 5 years old, and she had never once mentioned anything about Olivia's past. Nothing about the reasons for the adoption, nothing about her biological parents. For the first time, Olivia felt a sense of dread rise within her. What was Diane hiding? And why was she interrupting this moment when Olivia finally had the courage to confront her real parents? The judge looked at Diane with confusion, then back at Olivia, who was now struggling to keep her composure. "Diane," the judge said calmly, "if you have something to say, you should have said it before now. This court is in session." Diane glanced at the Taylors, who seemed as confused as she was, then back at Olivia. "I've kept this secret for far too long," Diane said, her voice shaking. "Olivia, you have no idea what you're walking into. You think you want answers, but what you don't know is..." The room gasped once again, and Olivia's stomach dropped. Diane's words were cut off by a loud crash outside the courtroom. The door slammed open once more, and 2 men in black suits stormed in, followed by the unmistakable sound of sirens wailing in the distance. One of the men stepped forward, his face grim. He held a thick, sealed envelope in his hand. "This is for you, Miss Olivia," the man said, his voice low. "You need to read this." The man handed her the envelope, and Olivia's fingers trembled as she reached for it. What was happening? Why was everything spinning out of control? She tore open the envelope, her heart racing as she pulled out a single sheet of paper. As her eyes scanned the letter, her mind began to race, her breath catching in her throat. The words on the paper were a mix of legal jargon and something far more personal. But as she read the letter, a wave of realization hit her harder than anything she'd ever experienced. Her whole life, everything she thought she knew, was about to come undone. And just as Olivia's mind reeled from the shocking words she had just read, a voice echoed in the courtroom, freezing her in place. "You don't know who you really are, Olivia." The voice was cold, detached, and completely unfamiliar. And at that moment, Olivia realized the truth. Her entire life had been a lie. The room was still, the weight of the words hanging in the air like a thick fog. Olivia could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her hands trembling as she held the letter in front of her. The words on the page swirled in her vision, but they were too hard to comprehend at first. She blinked, trying to focus, trying to make sense of what was happening. The voice, cold and unfamiliar, still echoed in her ears. It wasn't just the shock of hearing it. It was the realization that someone in this room, someone she trusted, was hiding something much bigger than she could have imagined. Who had spoken? Who was behind that voice? "Olivia, what does it say?" Diane's voice broke through her thoughts, but it was filled with anxiety, not the comfort Olivia was expecting. Diane took a step forward, her expression pleading, but Olivia could hardly look at her. The woman who had raised her was the one person she thought she could trust above all else. And yet, here she was, acting as though she was afraid of what Olivia might discover. Slowly, Olivia lowered the letter and met Diane's gaze. "What is going on, Diane?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "What's in this letter?" Diane swallowed hard, her face pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The room was thick with tension, and Olivia could feel every pair of eyes on her, waiting for the next move. "Miss Olivia," the man in the black suit spoke again, his voice sharp and authoritative. "We need to talk. You've just received information that changes everything you thought you knew. You need to come with us." Olivia looked at him, confused. "What do you mean? What's in the letter?" The man glanced at Diane, then back at Olivia. "The letter you're holding is only the beginning. You are not who you think you are, and the people in this room," he gestured toward Diane and the Taylors, "are not who you think they are either." The room seemed to close in on her. The air was suffocating, the walls pressing in. Olivia couldn't breathe, her mind spinning. What was happening? Who was this man? And why was he speaking to her like this? "You need to explain yourself," Olivia said, her voice cracking with frustration. "What do you mean? I'm not who I think I am." The man took a deep breath and straightened up, his eyes locking onto hers with intensity. "What I mean, Miss Olivia, is that the people you know as your biological parents are not actually your parents. The Taylors," he motioned to them, "are not your real mother and father." Olivia felt the ground slip out from under her. She staggered back, clutching the letter tightly in her hands. This couldn't be true. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. "That's impossible," Olivia shouted, her voice rising. "I know they're my parents. I've seen the adoption papers. I've seen the pictures. How could you say they aren't my real parents?" The Taylors were silent, their faces a mixture of guilt and disbelief. Mrs. Taylor's eyes were wide with shock, but Mr. Taylor looked away, his face flushed. "Olivia, please," Mr. Taylor began, his voice weak. "This is not what it seems. You need to listen." But Olivia cut him off, her anger flaring. "No, you're lying. Why would you lie about something like that? You're my parents. You raised me." The man in the black suit stepped closer, his tone firm but calm. "Your adoption was real, Olivia, but it was not what you were told. Your birth parents, those who signed the adoption papers, are not who you've been led to believe they are. The truth is far more complicated." Olivia's head spun. The words felt like a punch to the gut. She had spent her whole life believing the Taylors were her real parents, and now they were telling her it was all a lie. The world around her felt like it was crumbling, everything she knew falling apart in an instant. "What do you mean, complicated?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was struggling to hold herself together, her mind racing. Before the man could answer, Diane stepped forward, her face pale and full of regret. "Olivia, I didn't want you to find out this way," she said softly, her eyes brimming with tears. "There's so much I need to explain. I just didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." Olivia turned to her, her chest tightening. "Tell me what? What are you hiding? What's going on?" Diane hesitated for a moment, then she took a deep breath and spoke in a low, shaky voice. "Your real parents, they're in danger. And that's why we had to keep you from them. You were never meant to be with them. I made a promise to protect you, and that's why I adopted you. But it was never just about giving you a home." Olivia's mind was reeling. What was Diane saying? What did she mean, in danger? And why would she keep that from her? The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. No one dared to speak as Diane's words hung in the air. Olivia could feel her heart racing, 1,000 questions swirling in her head. What had Diane gotten herself into? And how did Olivia fit into all of this? The man in the black suit stepped forward again, his voice cutting through the tension. "The reason Diane adopted you, Olivia, is because your biological parents, your true parents, are involved in something far bigger than you could ever imagine. And now, they are being hunted." Olivia's mouth went dry. Her mind was struggling to catch up. "Hunted? What do you mean, hunted?" Before the man could answer, a loud banging noise erupted from the door, followed by several more men in black suits rushing in. They moved quickly and efficiently, blocking the exits. "Everyone stay where you are," one of the new men barked. "This is now a matter of national security. Nobody leaves this room." Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just some court case. This was something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. She looked around the room, her eyes wild with fear and confusion. What was going on? Why was everything happening so fast? What did her biological parents have to do with national security? And as the tension reached its peak, Olivia could feel the weight of everything she thought she knew slipping away. She was no longer just a girl confronting her parents in court. She was at the center of something dangerous, something far beyond her control. And she had no idea what was going to happen next. The sudden rush of men in black suits was enough to send a wave of panic through the courtroom. Olivia could feel her chest tightening as they moved swiftly and quietly, blocking every possible exit. The once quiet room, filled with uncertainty and confusion, had now become a battleground. Every movement seemed charged with danger, and Olivia's mind was racing. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice shaky as she looked from the man in the black suit to the new arrivals. "Why are they here? What do they want with me?" The man who had been speaking to her earlier stepped forward, his face hard with a mixture of resolve and fear. "Olivia, you need to understand. These people are part of a special unit. They're here because your life is in danger. They've been tracking your biological parents for months, and now you're caught in the middle of it." Olivia's mind was spinning. "In danger? What do you mean? Why would my life be in danger?" Before anyone could answer, another man in a black suit walked up to her, holding out a tablet. His face was serious, and he didn't say a word, but his eyes conveyed the urgency of the situation. The tablet flashed to life, showing a series of pictures, maps, and documents. Olivia squinted at the screen, struggling to make sense of it. "These are your biological parents," the man said, his voice cold and professional. "They've been involved in a covert operation for years. We've been monitoring their every move." Olivia's stomach dropped. She had never heard of any covert operation. All she knew was that she had been adopted when she was young, and that Diane and her family had taken care of her. She had never once thought about anything more, until now. "What does this have to do with me?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know if she could handle any more revelations. "What did my parents do that's so dangerous?" The man paused, his fingers scrolling across the tablet screen. "They were part of an underground movement. They were working on something that could change everything, politically, socially, and even militarily. And now, those who want to stop it will do anything to make sure it never sees the light of day, including coming after you. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. They were part of something like that? Her voice cracked as she spoke, the weight of the information nearly crushing her. And you didn't tell me? Diane, who had been standing quietly, now stepped forward. Her face was pale, and her hands were clasped tightly together. I didn't want to involve you, Olivia. I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you to grow up with this burden, with the danger of knowing too much. But now that you know, there's no turning back. Olivia turned to Diane, her eyes filled with hurt and confusion. You've kept this from me my whole life? You've lied to me about everything? Diane's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't back away. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you the truth. The people who were chasing your parents, they were dangerous. They still are. Before Olivia could respond, one of the men in black suits stepped forward, holding up a hand to stop her. We don't have time for explanations. We need to move her now. The words hit Olivia like a ton of bricks. Move me? What do you mean, move me? The man's expression didn't change. You're coming with us. There's a safe house waiting for you. We have to get you out of here before they find you. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but the gravity of the situation had her frozen in place. Her whole life had just been turned upside down. The only thing she could focus on now was the danger she was in. But where could she go? Who could she trust? She turned to the Taylors, her biological parents, but they were silent. Their faces were tense, as if they had already been through enough. Olivia's mind raced, but one thought stood out above all others. She had to leave. If what they were saying was true, staying here could get her killed. Take me somewhere safe, Olivia said, her voice steady now, though her mind was reeling. But I need to know one thing first. What's going to happen to them? She motioned toward the Taylors. Diane stepped closer to her, her voice quiet but firm. They'll be fine, Olivia, Diane said, though her voice trembled. They'll be protected. But you can't stay here. Not if you want to survive. The men in black suits nodded, their eyes scanning the room. One of them stepped forward and placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder. We're moving out now. We'll explain everything once you're safe. Olivia felt a chill run down her spine as she followed the men toward the exit. She glanced back at Diane, her adoptive mother's face filled with sorrow and regret. Olivia wanted to say something, anything, that would make sense of all this, but the words wouldn't come. As they reached the door, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Someone shouted from outside, and the unmistakable sound of gunfire followed. Olivia's heart stopped. The doors slammed shut, and the men in black suits rushed into action. The room was thrown into chaos as the first shots rang out. Olivia barely had time to react before she was pulled down to the ground, her heart racing. What's happening? She cried out, panic creeping into her voice. But the man beside her was already on his feet, ushering her toward a hidden door at the back of the courtroom. Move, he shouted, pulling her toward the door. Now. They ran through the narrow hallway, the sound of gunfire growing louder behind them. Olivia's legs were shaky, but she couldn't stop. The danger was real, and she had no idea what was going to happen next. All she knew was that the people she thought she could trust were involved in something she couldn't even begin to understand. As they burst through the back door and into the alleyway, Olivia's breath caught in her throat. A black van was parked at the end of the alley, its doors wide open. The men in black suits were already inside, waiting for her. Get in, one of them yelled. Olivia hesitated for a second before scrambling into the van. The doors slammed shut behind her, and the van screeched to life, speeding down the alley. Olivia looked out the back window, her heart still racing. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life had just changed forever. And the worst part? She still didn't know who to trust. The van sped through the darkened streets, the headlights cutting through the foggy night. Olivia could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The men in black suits, who had been quiet since they rushed her out of the courtroom, sat stoically in the back with her, their eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. They were on high alert, as if every moment was a countdown to something terrible. Olivia sat frozen, her thoughts a whirlpool of confusion and fear. What had just happened? She had gone from sitting in a courtroom, confronting her biological parents about their abandonment, to being whisked away in a van with strangers who claimed to be protecting her from something she didn't understand. All the questions swirling in her mind threatened to suffocate her. "Where are we going?" Olivia finally asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was low and shaky, barely above a whisper. "Why do I have to leave? Why can't I go back home?" The man sitting across from her, the one who had spoken earlier, finally looked her way. His eyes were dark, his face emotionless. "You're in danger," he said flatly. "We need to keep you safe. They'll be looking for you. Your parents, your real parents, are in hiding, and they don't want you to get caught in the crossfire." Olivia's mind was reeling. Real parents? Hiding? What was he talking about? Diane had always been her mom. The Taylors, though not her biological parents, had given her love and care. They were her family. Now, all of a sudden, she was being told she didn't belong to them, that her biological parents were involved in something so dangerous that she had to run for her life. Her heart pounded in her chest. She felt as though the world she knew had shattered into pieces, and she was scrambling to put it back together. The weight of the truth was more than she could bear. "Who are these people?" Olivia asked, her voice cracking. "My real parents. What did they do? Why are they in hiding?" The man remained silent for a moment, his jaw clenched tightly. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully, but Olivia wasn't going to let him off that easily. "Tell me," she insisted, her voice trembling with frustration. "What did they do that's so bad? Why do they want me? What's happening?" Finally, the man sighed, his eyes narrowing. "Your parents were part of a secret organization. They were working on something big, something that could change everything. The people who are after them, they'll stop at nothing to make sure it never sees the light of day." Olivia's mind struggled to grasp the weight of his words. "What do you mean, something big? What kind of organization?" The man shook his head, glancing toward the front of the van, where the driver remained silent and focused. "I can't explain everything right now. You wouldn't understand it all anyway. But the people you're dealing with, they're powerful, dangerous, and they'll do anything to silence your parents and anyone connected to them." Olivia felt a cold chill wash over her. She had never imagined her life would take such a turn. One minute she was trying to confront the parents who had abandoned her, and the next, she was being told that the family she thought she knew was a lie. She was caught in something much bigger than she could understand. "We're almost there," the man said, breaking the silence once again. "Just stay calm, Olivia. We're getting you to a safe house. You'll be protected there. The people we're working with," he paused, glancing at her once more, "they'll explain everything to you." Olivia nodded, though her thoughts were racing. The safe house. How would it be any different from the van she was in now? She had no idea who these people were, and every instinct told her she couldn't trust them. But the look in the man's eyes, an unspoken promise that her safety was his priority, made her hesitate. The van continued to speed through the night, the city lights flickering as they passed. Olivia leaned her head against the cold window, watching the world blur by. Her mind wandered to Diane, to the Taylors, to the life she thought she had known. How could everything change so quickly? One minute, she had been confronting the people who abandoned her, and now her life had been turned upside down by secrets and lies. The driver's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're here," he said, his tone low and calm. The van slowed, turning onto a narrow, dimly lit street. Olivia looked out the window, her heart racing. The area was quiet, eerily quiet. The buildings around her were old, with cracked windows and peeling paint. It looked nothing like the safe, suburban neighborhood she had grown up in. The van came to a stop in front of an old building, hidden away at the end of the street. Olivia felt a knot form in her stomach. This didn't look like a place of safety. It looked like a place where people disappeared. The man across from her opened the door and stepped out, quickly scanning the area before offering his hand to Olivia. She hesitated, her body frozen with uncertainty, but she knew there was no turning back now. "Come on," he urged. "It's safe here. For now." Olivia climbed out of the van, her legs feeling weak as she stepped onto the cracked pavement. She could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her, every step drawing her further into the unknown. They moved quickly toward the building, and Olivia glanced over her shoulder, half expecting someone to be following them. But the street remained silent, still, almost unnervingly so. As they reached the entrance of the building, the man stepped forward, tapping a code into a keypad beside the door. The door clicked open, and he motioned for Olivia to follow him. Inside, the building smelled musty, and the lights flickered overhead. The hallways were narrow, the walls lined with old, faded pictures and papers that seemed to belong to a different time. Olivia's footsteps echoed in the empty space, making the place feel even more ominous. The man led her through a series of dark corridors, finally stopping at a door near the end of the hallway. He knocked twice, then opened it, revealing a small, dimly lit room. "This is where you'll stay," he said, stepping inside and gesturing for Olivia to follow. "There's food, water, and a bed. You can rest here while we make sure everything is secure." Olivia entered the room, her mind still spinning. She had no idea who these people were, what they wanted, or what was really going on. She felt like she had stepped into a world of shadows, where nothing was what it seemed. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Not Diane, not the Taylors, not even these men in black suits. She collapsed onto the bed, her thoughts racing. Her whole life had just been upended, and the only thing she could do now was wait. Wait for answers. Wait for the truth. But deep down, she knew one thing for sure. Her journey was just beginning, and she had no idea where it would take her. As she lay there in the dark, a thought crossed her mind, cold and heavy. What if the danger wasn't just coming for her parents? What if it was coming for her too? And before she could finish processing that thought, the door to the room creaked open again. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. Someone was watching her. Someone was about to tell her something that would change everything again. "Olivia," the man's voice was low, urgent. "You need to see this." She didn't move. "See what?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your real parents, they're not just hiding. They've been taken." Olivia's blood ran cold. Olivia felt the air in the room grow thick with tension as the man's words hung in the air. "Taken?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel her heart pounding against her chest as the full weight of his words settled in. What did that mean? Were her parents dead? Or worse, who had taken them? And why? The questions piled up in her mind like bricks, each one adding more pressure to her already fragile state. The man's face was hard, his expression grim as he stepped further into the room. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, she saw something akin to sympathy flicker in his gaze. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "They've been taken by the people who are after them," he said, his voice low and controlled. "They knew it was only a matter of time before your biological parents became targets. We've been tracking them for months, but this—" He trailed off, his words hanging in the air, unfinished. Olivia stood frozen, her mind struggling to keep up. She felt like she was suffocating under the weight of it all. Her entire life had just been upended. Her biological parents were part of a secret organization, and now they were being hunted by powerful people. Diane, the woman who had raised her, had been hiding the truth for years, and Olivia hadn't even known. She'd been thrown into a game she didn't understand, with rules she couldn't even begin to grasp. "What do you mean, taken?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking. "Who took them? Why now?" "I don't understand." The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for Olivia to sit down on the bed. He leaned against the wall, his face a mask of stoic resolve. "The people after them are called the Syndicate. They're a covert group with interests in controlling anything that could give them power. Your biological parents were working on something they believed could change the course of history, but it was too much for the Syndicate to allow. So, they took them, hoping to get the information they needed before it's too late." Olivia felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. "What kind of information?" she asked. "What could they have been working on that was so important?" The man's eyes darkened as he looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't have all the details." But what I do know is that your parents were key players in this project. And now, the syndicate believes that you hold the key to everything they need. Olivia's mind reeled at his words. Me? She asked, her voice barely audible. Why would they think I have anything to do with it? The man paused, as if weighing his words. It's because of who you are. You have a connection to the project, Olivia. Your parents didn't just keep you hidden because they wanted to protect you. They kept you away from the syndicate because they knew this day would come. And now it has. Olivia's head spun. The project, the syndicate, the danger. Everything was connected, and yet she was at the center of it without even knowing why. How do you know all of this? She asked, her voice shaking. Why are you helping me? How do I know I can trust you? The man looked at her, his eyes unwavering. You don't have to trust me, he said quietly, but you don't have a choice. They know you're here, and they're coming for you. We have to get you out of here before it's too late. Olivia's chest tightened. Who's coming for me? And where do we go? The man's eyes darkened. The syndicate's reach is everywhere, Olivia. We don't have a lot of time. We're going to get you to another safe house. It's the only place left where we can keep you safe from them. Olivia's mind was racing. She didn't know who to trust, but she couldn't stay here. She had no choice but to go with him. She had to survive. She had to understand what was happening. I'm ready, Olivia said, standing up from the bed. She didn't know what awaited her, but she had no choice now. The man moved toward her, signaling for her to follow. As they exited the room, Olivia felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. Every step she took seemed to carry her deeper into a world of shadows and danger. There were no guarantees, no assurances, just a growing sense of fear and uncertainty. They moved through the building in silence, each step heavy with the knowledge that they were being watched. Olivia could feel eyes on her, even though she didn't know where they were coming from. The building felt like a maze, with corridors and hidden doors, all designed to keep secrets safe. The man led her to the back of the building, where a small, inconspicuous door was hidden behind a stack of boxes. He opened it, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into a dimly lit underground passage. Stay close, the man said, his voice low. This is the only way out. Olivia followed him down the staircase, her heart racing. The passage was cold and damp, the walls covered in peeling paint. It felt like she was descending into another world, one where the rules were different and danger lurked at every turn. At the bottom of the stairs, the man stopped and turned to Olivia. We have to be careful, he warned. There are people watching this place. If they know we're leaving, they'll be on our tail immediately. Olivia nodded, her pulse quickening. The air felt thick with tension, each step taking her closer to an unknown future. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again. As they moved deeper into the passage, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every sound echoed off the walls, every step felt amplified in the silence. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind them. But the hallway was empty, shrouded in darkness. Finally, they reached a heavy steel door at the end of the passage. The man took out a small key from his pocket and unlocked it, pushing the door open with a loud creak. Beyond it was a small, dimly lit room, filled with crates and equipment. Get in, the man urged, pushing Olivia inside. This is a transport vehicle. It'll get you to the safe house. Olivia stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. The walls were lined with shelves filled with tools and supplies. In the corner, there was a small bed and a table covered with papers and maps. This was where they were hiding her? The man closed the door behind them, locking it securely. He turned to Olivia, his face serious. You'll be safe here for now. But you need to know this. The syndicate is everywhere. They've been watching you. They know you're connected to this project, and they won't stop until they find you. Olivia swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. What do I do now? The man's eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of resolve and fear. Now, you wait, and you prepare. Because this is just the beginning. The door creaked open again. But this time, it wasn't just one man stepping through. It was a whole team, armed and ready. Olivia froze. They had found her. Olivia's heart raced as the door swung open, revealing a group of heavily armed men. Their cold, calculating eyes scanned the room, locking onto her with terrifying precision. The man who had been guiding her stiffened beside her, his hand instinctively moving toward his jacket as if to prepare for a confrontation. But he didn't make a move, and Olivia could feel the air grow even colder, more oppressive. "Is she the one?" one of the men asked, his voice gravelly, almost too calm for the situation. His hand rested on the hilt of a weapon, and his eyes never left Olivia's face. The man who had been protecting her nodded, his expression tight with worry. "Yes," he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We need to move quickly. They're already here." Olivia's breath hitched. Her mind struggled to make sense of what was happening. Who were these men? Had they come to help her, or were they the ones sent by the syndicate? The room was spinning, and for a moment, she could hardly breathe, her mind racing in 100 different directions. The leader of the group stepped forward, his eyes scanning her with an almost clinical detachment. "We don't have time for questions," he said, his tone cold. "We've been compromised. You're coming with us now, whether you like it or not." Before Olivia could react, the man who had been guiding her grabbed her arm firmly, pulling her toward the exit. "Move," he shouted. "They're closing in fast." Olivia felt a jolt of panic surge through her body as the men surrounded her, ushering her through a narrow passageway in the back of the room. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, but she was paralyzed by fear. These men looked like they were prepared for anything, and her instincts told her that trying to escape would only get her hurt. They moved quickly, the dim lighting flickering above them as they passed through hallway after hallway. Olivia could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, the sound deafening in the tense silence. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone right on their tail, but the hallway remained empty, still, too still. As they reached another set of stairs, the leader of the group turned to Olivia. "You need to understand something, kid," he said in a low, dangerous tone. "The syndicate doesn't play games. They have eyes everywhere, and they'll stop at nothing to find you. You're not just some kid caught in the middle of this. You're a target." Olivia's chest tightened as the weight of his words sank in. A target? She had always thought of herself as just a teenager trying to figure out her place in the world. But now, it seemed like she had been thrust into a deadly game, one where survival depended on the people she was surrounded by. "I don't even know what's going on," Olivia whispered, her voice cracking. "Why is this happening to me? Why do they want me?" The leader didn't answer right away. He just kept walking, his eyes darting around, his hand resting on the gun at his side. "We'll explain when we're safe. For now, keep your head down. And don't trust anyone. Not even us." Olivia's stomach dropped. She had no choice but to trust these men. There was nowhere else to turn. But the thought of being constantly on the run, surrounded by people who didn't seem to have her best interests at heart, filled her with dread. They emerged into an alleyway, and the cold air hit Olivia's face like a slap. The city's streets were eerily quiet, but she could feel the danger closing in around her, suffocating her with every step she took. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed down the alley, a car engine roaring to life. "Get in," the leader barked, his voice full of urgency. Olivia didn't hesitate this time. She climbed into the black SUV that had pulled up, the door slamming shut behind her. The car screeched down the alley, the tires spinning as they raced away from the building. Olivia glanced out the back window, half expecting to see someone chasing them. But the alley was empty, the shadows hiding whatever dangers lurked in the darkness. As they sped through the city streets, Olivia couldn't help but feel a growing sense of isolation. Everything she had known, everything she had believed, had been shattered in a matter of hours. Her biological parents were gone, her adoptive mother had lied to her, and now she was on the run with a group of strangers who didn't even seem to care about her. The leader of the group, who had remained silent during the drive, finally spoke up again. "We're headed to the safe house now," he said, his voice low. "It's the only place where you'll be able to lay low. But the syndicate is always watching. We'll need to stay one step ahead of them if we want to keep you alive." Olivia nodded, her mind still in a state of chaos. She couldn't process everything at once. She needed answers. but they were slipping through her fingers faster than she could grasp them. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What makes me so important to them? Why do they think I have the answers?" The leader glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "We'll explain everything once we're there," he said. "But you need to understand this. You're not just a piece of this puzzle. You are the puzzle. Your parents didn't hide you for nothing. You've been kept safe for a reason, Olivia." The words sent a chill down her spine. What did he mean? She had no idea what she was supposed to be, or what role she played in whatever this was. All she knew was that she was in the middle of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. They drove in silence for what felt like hours, Olivia lost in her thoughts, trying to piece together everything that had happened. She could still hear the echo of the gunfire from the courtroom, the fear in Diane's voice, and the cold reality that her biological parents had been taken. Finally, the car slowed to a stop, and the leader turned to Olivia. "We're here." Olivia looked around. The building they had arrived at was an unmarked, nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It didn't look like a place where people would go for safety. It looked like a place where people disappeared. The leader motioned for her to follow, and she stepped out of the car, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. As they entered the building, she could see a handful of other people moving in the shadows. They looked like soldiers, their eyes scanning every corner of the room. The man led her to a small, isolated room in the back, where a cot was set up in the corner. "Rest here," he said. "We'll keep watch. You're safe for now." But Olivia didn't feel safe. She felt trapped. She felt like a pawn in a game she couldn't understand. And as the door closed behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the danger was only getting closer. She lay down on the cot, her mind racing with questions. What had her parents been working on? Why was she so important? And most importantly, who could she trust now? As the night wore on, Olivia drifted in and out of a restless sleep, each time waking with the feeling that something was wrong. She couldn't shake the fear gnawing at her from the inside out, and as she lay there in the dark, she couldn't help but wonder. How long would she have before the syndicate found her? And would she be ready when they did? Olivia awoke with a jolt, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was pitch black, the only sound the faint hum of the building's machinery in the distance. She sat up on the cot, the cold metal pressing against her skin as she tried to shake the fog from her mind. It had been hours since they arrived at the so-called safe house, but she couldn't escape the nagging feeling that danger was closing in, no matter how many walls they put between her and the syndicate. She glanced at the door, half expecting someone to burst through at any moment. The silence in the room felt suffocating, and the air was thick with tension. She was alone, or at least, she thought she was. The sudden sound of footsteps outside the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Olivia's body tensed instinctively, her breath catching in her throat. She had learned to trust no one, and even the slightest sound made her heart race with fear. The door creaked open, and Olivia instinctively reached for the small knife she had been given earlier, a precaution from one of the men. Her hand closed around the handle, her grip tightening as the figure stepped into the room. It was the leader. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette barely visible in the low light. "Olivia," he said in a low voice, his tone a mixture of urgency and authority. "We need to talk. It's time for you to know everything." Olivia lowered the knife, but kept it within reach. Her eyes locked onto him, her mind still racing. "What is it? What's going on?" Her voice was hoarse from lack of sleep and stress. The leader stepped into the room and shut the door behind him, his eyes scanning the surroundings before settling on Olivia. "This place isn't as secure as we thought. The syndicate is getting closer, and we've just learned something crucial." He paused, looking at her with a serious expression. "They know where you are." A cold shiver ran down Olivia's spine. "How? I thought we were safe here." "We were," he replied, "but we underestimated how far their reach goes. They've planted people in every corner of the city, and we think they've already infiltrated this place. We've got to move, and we have to do it now." Olivia's mind spun with panic. "Where are we going? How do we escape them?" The leader didn't immediately answer. Instead, he walked over to a small table in the corner, where a map of the city lay. He tapped on a red X marked in the center. We're going here. It's an old facility, used as a backup by a few of our allies. It's off the grid, isolated. We'll be safe there for now. Olivia tried to steady her breathing. How do we get there without being seen? That's why we need to leave now, the leader said, his voice firm. I've already arranged for a car. We'll take the back roads. It's going to be a long drive, but it's our best shot. Olivia nodded slowly, still processing everything. She had been thrown into a nightmare she didn't understand, and now she was running again. But this time, it felt different. The weight of the situation was too much. Her real parents were gone, and the syndicate was after her. The questions in her head kept building. Why was she important? Why had her parents kept her hidden for so long? She stood up from the cot, her legs a little unsteady from the hours of restlessness. She followed the leader through the building, moving silently as they passed through the darkened halls. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, making Olivia feel even more vulnerable. The building was eerily quiet, and every corner they turned seemed to hide some new danger. They reached a back exit, and the leader motioned for Olivia to follow him outside. The cold night air hit her face as they stepped into the alley. She looked around, half expecting to see shadows lurking in the corners. The leader led her to a black SUV parked against the wall. The car was unmarked, but the tinted windows made it clear that it was meant to blend in with the darkness. Olivia climbed into the car, her eyes darting around as the leader got in beside her. The engine roared to life, and they sped off down the street, the tires screeching as they cut through the night. As the car veered onto a less populated road, Olivia's thoughts began to race again. They were headed toward some facility, some safe haven, but how safe could it really be if the syndicate was already hunting her down? How could she trust these people who claimed to be protecting her? How did they find out? Olivia asked, breaking the silence. How did the syndicate even know I was here? The leader glanced over at her briefly, his face serious. We think it's someone in the organization, someone close to us. We've been compromised from within. From within? Olivia repeated, her voice sharp. You mean someone you trust is working with them? The leader nodded. We can't rule that out. There's a traitor among us. And until we figure out who it is, we can't trust anyone. Not even the people we've been working with for years. Olivia's stomach churned. The idea of betrayal was worse than the constant fear she already felt. If someone on their side was working with the syndicate, she was in even more danger than she realized. As they drove deeper into the night, the landscape around them grew more barren. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by fields and empty stretches of land. Olivia glanced out the window, trying to find some sense of peace in the quiet. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Finally, after what felt like hours, the leader spoke again. We're almost there. Stay alert. The car slowed as they turned onto a dirt road, the tires crunching over the gravel. Olivia felt her pulse quicken, her body tensing as they drove deeper into the woods. The trees around them grew denser, the shadows swallowing the car whole. There was no sign of life here. No streetlights, no houses, no sign of civilization. And then, ahead, Olivia saw it. A large, dilapidated building loomed in the distance, its silhouette barely visible through the trees. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. But something about it felt different, more sinister. That's it, the leader said, pointing toward the building. The safe house. The car came to a halt just outside the gates. The leader motioned for Olivia to stay in the vehicle while he stepped out to speak with a man standing guard at the entrance. As Olivia waited, she glanced around, her mind on high alert. The weight of the situation was heavy, and she felt the pressure building once more. They were so close now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air was thick with tension, and every instinct in her told her that she wasn't as safe as they wanted her to believe. The leader returned to the car, his expression unreadable. We're in, he said curtly. Let's go. Olivia hesitated for a moment, then opened the door and followed him toward the building. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. As they moved further inside, Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. It was quieter here than the building they had come from, but there was something unsettling about it. They stopped in front of a locked door. The leader pulled out a key and unlocked it, motioning for Olivia to enter. "This is your room," he said, his tone softer now. "Get some rest. We'll start moving again once the sun comes up." Olivia nodded, but as she stepped into the room, her mind was still racing. The tension in the air was palpable, and the walls felt like they were closing in around her. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone following them, but the hallway was empty. Closing the door behind her, Olivia sank down onto the bed, her head spinning with questions. What had her parents been working on? What was it that the syndicate wanted? And most importantly, who could she trust in this new, dangerous world she was now a part of? She lay back, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing as the darkness closed in around her. And then she heard it. A faint noise from somewhere down the hallway. A whisper. Someone was coming. And Olivia knew, deep in her gut, that whatever was coming for her, it was closer than ever before. The faint whispering sound grew louder, sending a chill through Olivia's spine. She held her breath, straining to listen, her heart hammering in her chest. Her instinct screamed at her to stay still, to pretend she was asleep, but something inside her told her that wasn't an option. The room felt too quiet, too still. And the whispering? It wasn't just a random noise. It was deliberate. Someone was trying to be quiet, but they were getting closer. Olivia sat up slowly, her legs dangling off the side of the bed. The cold air in the room made her shiver, and her fingers instinctively tightened around the small knife she had been given earlier. She tried to stay as silent as possible, but her mind was racing. Was it one of the guards? Was someone in the building with ill intentions? The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, and Olivia could feel her pulse in her ears, each beat loud and frantic. Every part of her body screamed to move, to get up and run, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. Then, she heard it, a soft knock on the door. It was so quiet that it barely registered in the otherwise silent room, but it was enough to make Olivia's stomach drop. "Olivia," a voice called from the other side of the door. It was low, just above a whisper, but familiar. "It's me. Open up." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't recognize the voice at first, but something in it made her hesitate. Was it one of the men from earlier? Had something happened to the leader? Still gripping the knife, Olivia slowly moved toward the door, her steps as quiet as possible. She pressed her ear against it, trying to listen, trying to discern if there was anyone else nearby. The hallway remained silent, no footsteps or murmurs from the other side. She took a deep breath, summoning her courage, and cracked the door open just a sliver. What she saw almost made her drop the knife. Standing in front of her was Diane, her adoptive mother. Olivia froze, the blood draining from her face. "Diane," she whispered, barely able to breathe. Her mind was spinning. Why was she here? How had she gotten past the guards? The last time Olivia had seen her, Diane had seemed like a distant memory, someone locked away in the past, someone who had lied, kept secrets, and disappeared from her life. Yet, here she was, standing in front of her, looking just as she remembered. "Olivia, we don't have much time," Diane said urgently, her eyes darting around nervously. "Please, you have to come with me." Olivia's body stiffened, her fingers still gripping the knife. "How did you get here? How did you know I was here?" she asked, her voice trembling with both fear and disbelief. "I didn't know where you were until tonight, but I was contacted by someone I trust," Diane explained quickly, glancing over her shoulder as if checking for anyone listening. "They told me about the danger you're in. You have to come with me. They're looking for you, Olivia. They'll find you here." "Who? Who's looking for me?" Olivia asked, her throat dry as the panic started to build in her chest. "They're not just looking for you," Diane said, her voice barely audible. "They're after your parents. They were going to use you to get to them, but now that you're involved, it's all connected. I've been trying to protect you, trying to keep you safe, but they won't stop. They'll keep coming until they find you." Olivia's mind spun, the pieces of the puzzle slowly beginning to fall into place, but the full picture was still blurry, unclear. "What are you talking about? Who are they? What is this all about?" Diane's face was full of sorrow, her expression tense as she grasped Olivia's arm, pulling her away from the door. "I don't have much time to explain," she whispered urgently, "but we can't stay here. If you don't trust me, trust the fact that there are people who are trying to hurt you. They're not just after your parents. They'll come for anyone who gets in their way, including you." Olivia's chest tightened, her head spinning with everything Diane was saying. The syndicate, her parents' disappearance, the lies, and now, her adoptive mother, standing here in front of her, seemingly with answers, yet with so many more questions. "Diane," Olivia said, her voice trembling, "how do I know you're telling the truth? I've trusted you all my life, but I don't know what's real anymore. Who are these people? Why didn't you tell me?" Diane paused, her eyes filled with pain and regret. She looked as though she were about to say something more, but before she could speak, there was a loud crash from down the hallway. The noise was deafening, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots pounding against the floor, getting closer with each passing second. "Olivia, they're here," Diane said, her voice sharp with panic. "They found us. We don't have time. We need to go now." Before Olivia could protest, Diane pulled her toward the door and out into the dimly lit hallway. The guards from earlier were nowhere to be seen, and the building seemed to be abandoned, silent and ominous. But Olivia's mind was too frazzled to process the fear. She was more concerned about the footsteps growing louder, the certainty that someone was right behind them. As they reached the end of the hallway, the lights flickered overhead, and Olivia glanced behind her, expecting to see figures coming around the corner. She had no idea where they were going, no idea how to escape, but she knew one thing for sure. They had no time to waste. Diane led her toward a small exit at the back of the building, rusted door barely visible in the shadows. She didn't look back as she yanked it open, motioning for Olivia to hurry inside. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She stepped into the cold, night air, looking around at the barren surroundings. She couldn't see anyone in the immediate area, but she knew they wouldn't be far behind. The sound of footsteps was now deafening, and the air was thick with the threat of what was coming. Diane grabbed Olivia's arm and pulled her toward a parked car hidden behind a large, crumbling warehouse. The engine roared to life as soon as they slid into the seats. Without saying a word, the car peeled off, speeding down a dark, winding road. As they sped through the night, Olivia looked out the window, her mind racing. Her entire life had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. She had no idea who to trust, no idea where to go. But there was one thing she knew for certain now. Whoever was after her wouldn't stop until they found her. And as the car raced into the dark unknown, Olivia realized that no matter how fast she ran, the past was never far behind. And it was coming for her. The real question was, could she outrun it? The car sped through the winding roads, the tires crunching against gravel, as Olivia's heart raced in her chest. The city lights had long faded behind them, replaced by dark fields and trees that seemed to close in around them. It was as if the world itself was conspiring to swallow them whole. The car's headlights barely cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the empty road ahead. Olivia sat in the passenger seat, her eyes darting back and forth, watching for any sign of movement in the rearview mirror. Her fingers gripped the seatbelt tightly, the cold metal of the knife still pressed against her leg. Her mind was a blur of questions, fear, and disbelief. She had trusted Diane, believed in her, but now she wasn't sure who she could trust anymore. Why had Diane shown up here? And why, after all these years of silence, was she suddenly involved in something so dangerous? "Where are we going?" Olivia finally asked, her voice trembling slightly as she broke the silence. The weight of the question felt heavier than she expected. Diane's eyes stayed focused on the road ahead, her grip on the steering wheel tight. "To a place where you'll be safe," she said, her voice low, but the tension in it was unmistakable. "We have a few allies who can help us. We'll figure out what's really going on and make sure you're protected." Olivia swallowed hard. "Allies? I don't understand. Who are they? What exactly is going on, Diane? What was our part in all of this?" Diane hesitated for a moment, her jaw tightening as if she was choosing her words carefully. "Your parents," she began, Her voice steady despite the panic Olivia could sense just below the surface, weren't just involved in some covert project. They were leaders of a movement, a resistance. What they were trying to do, it's bigger than anything you can imagine. It could change everything. But people didn't want that. The syndicate didn't want that. And now, they're hunting anyone who had a part in it, including you. Olivia felt a chill spread through her chest. Resistance? Movement? Her mind struggled to process the magnitude of what Diane was saying. Her parents had never mentioned anything about any of this. They had kept her in the dark. But why? What were they trying to protect her from? And why, of all things, did the syndicate want to stop something that could change everything? They were trying to bring down the syndicate, Diane continued, her eyes never leaving the road, the words spilling out as if they were long overdue. The syndicate controls so much: information, resources, power. Your parents didn't want to just expose them. They wanted to take them down. They were working on something that could have put an end to it all. But the syndicate found out. They found out what they were planning, and they had to stop it. They're willing to kill anyone who was involved, anyone who knows too much. Olivia sat in stunned silence, the weight of Diane's words sinking into her. Everything she thought she knew about her life, about her family, was now in question. She had no idea what her parents had been involved in, but now she understood why they had kept her hidden. It wasn't just to protect her from ordinary threats. It was to keep her safe from something far more dangerous. Your parents knew the risks, Diane said, her voice softening, as if she were speaking more to herself than to Olivia. They knew that if they failed, it would mean losing everything they worked for. And it would mean losing you, too. Olivia's stomach twisted as she tried to digest what Diane was telling her. Her parents had sacrificed everything, hidden her away, kept her out of the loop, for her own safety. But they hadn't told her the full truth. Diane had kept the truth hidden from her, too. But why? Why didn't you tell me before? Olivia's voice broke as she spoke. Why didn't you tell me any of this? All these years, I thought you were my mom. I thought you loved me. But you kept this from me. You kept me in the dark, Diane. Diane's grip on the steering wheel tightened, her knuckles white. I didn't know how to tell you, Olivia. I thought I was protecting you. You weren't supposed to know. You were supposed to have a normal life, one without all the danger, without all the bloodshed. But now you're involved, whether you like it or not. Olivia shook her head, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. I don't know what to believe anymore. Who are you? Who are these people you're talking about? How do I know you're not working with the syndicate? The words hung in the air between them, and Diane seemed to flinch, her face drawn and tired. For the first time, Olivia saw a crack in her mother's calm exterior, a flash of vulnerability, maybe even fear. I'm not working with them, Diane said firmly, her voice hard. I've been working to protect you. I didn't want you to be a part of this, but you are now, and I will do anything to keep you safe. Olivia was quiet for a long time, the reality of their situation settling in. They were on the run. There was nowhere safe anymore. No place to hide. Every step she took felt like it was pulling her deeper into something she didn't fully understand. How much further? Olivia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Diane glanced at the rearview mirror. Not much. We'll be there soon. Olivia nodded, but couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her gut that something wasn't right. The quiet night stretched on, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, that the syndicate had already caught wind of their escape. A few minutes later, the car slowed to a stop. Diane pulled off the main road and onto a small dirt path that wound through dense trees. Olivia watched through the window as the darkness closed in, the headlights casting long shadows that seemed to move with them. The car stopped at a small, nondescript cabin hidden deep in the woods. It looked abandoned, the wood of the structure weathered and worn, but it didn't feel like a safe place. Not anymore. Diane parked the car, and they both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. Come on, Diane said quietly, finally breaking the silence. We need to go inside. We'll be safer there. Olivia nodded, but a cold dread had settled over her. She opened the door and stepped out, her feet crunching against the dry leaves on the ground. Diane led her to the cabin, her footsteps steady but quick. Olivia's eyes kept darting around, half expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. They reached the cabin, and Diane opened the door, revealing a dimly lit room. There was a fireplace in the corner, a small kitchen table, and a couple of worn couches. It was simple, sparse, but functional. "You can rest here," Diane said, her voice soft. "We need to figure out what to do next." "We'll make a plan, Olivia." Olivia's mind was racing. What kind of plan could they make now? The syndicate was hunting her, hunting them, and she had no idea how to escape it. How could they stop something so powerful? As Diane set down a bag on the floor and moved to the small kitchen, Olivia walked over to the window, staring out into the night. The silence was deafening, but Olivia knew that it wouldn't last long. The threat was out there, waiting, and as she looked out into the woods, she heard it. A car engine in the distance. A car that was coming closer. The syndicate had found them. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest as the unmistakable sound of the car engine grew louder. She pressed herself against the window, her eyes scanning the dark trees for any sign of movement. The car's headlights cut through the night, casting long shadows across the ground. She knew what it meant. They were here. The syndicate had tracked them down. "Diane," Olivia whispered urgently, turning to her adoptive mother, who was still in the kitchen. Her voice was barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might attract even more attention. "They're here. They found us." Diane froze, her back stiffening at the sound of Olivia's voice. Her eyes widened with shock, but she quickly recovered, her face hardening with resolve. Without saying a word, she moved to the window, peering through the blinds with a calm that Olivia couldn't fully understand. Diane had always been the one to keep her calm, to shield her from the worst of the world. But in that moment, Olivia wasn't so sure Diane had control over this situation anymore. "We need to leave," Diane said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. She turned to face Olivia, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "We can't stay here. Not now." Olivia didn't need any more convincing. She grabbed her jacket from the chair and slid it on, her mind racing with panic. How had they found them so quickly? Had they been followed from the car? How had they known where to go? Diane moved toward the back of the cabin, her movements swift and practiced. "There's a tunnel out back," she said. "It'll take us to a safe spot. We'll go through the woods, away from the road. We can lose them in the trees." Olivia followed her, trying to keep her breathing steady, but her hands were shaking. The weight of the situation was crashing down on her. Her parents, her real parents, were gone. The syndicate was after her, and she had no idea what they wanted. Every part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she knew there wasn't time for that now. They had to run. They had to survive. They reached the back of the cabin, where a small wooden door led to a darkened hallway. Diane opened it cautiously, peering into the gloom before stepping inside. Olivia hesitated, but only for a second. She followed, the cold air from the tunnel making her skin prickle with unease. The tunnel was narrow, the walls made of rough-hewn stone, and it sloped downward slightly. The path was lit only by the faint glow of a lantern Diane had carried with her. As they moved further into the tunnel, the sound of the car engine grew louder, and Olivia's pulse quickened. Were they too late? Were they already inside the cabin? Diane didn't slow down. She moved quickly, her footsteps barely making a sound on the dirt floor. Olivia kept her head down, focusing on keeping her breathing steady as they made their way deeper into the tunnel. They needed to get out of there. They needed to get far away before the syndicate found them. They reached the end of the tunnel, where a heavy wooden door stood. Diane motioned for Olivia to wait, then cautiously opened the door, peeking out into the night. The moonlight illuminated a thick stretch of forest, the trees casting long, dark shadows over the ground. "This way," Diane whispered, leading Olivia through the door and into the woods. The cool air was refreshing, but Olivia didn't feel safe. Not with every step, every shadow, every sound echoing in her mind. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone following them. Closing in, they moved swiftly through the trees, their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. Olivia's legs ached from the effort of keeping up, but she forced herself to keep going, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Diane was ahead of her, cutting through the trees with purpose, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Stay close," Diane urged, her voice low. "We need to get to the ridge. Once we're there, we'll be able to see if they're following us. But we have to hurry." Olivia nodded, her mind racing. How had the syndicate found them so quickly? And how had they known where to look? She was sure they had covered their tracks, but it seemed that every time they turned a corner, the syndicate was right behind them. They reached the ridge after what felt like an eternity, their breaths coming in shallow gasps. From the top, Olivia could see the lights of the cabin in the distance, far below. The road was visible from here, too, empty and silent. But that didn't mean they were safe. Diane turned to Olivia, her expression grim. "We're not safe yet," she said quietly. "The syndicate will stop at nothing to find you. And they're not just looking for you anymore. They're looking for anyone who knows too much. Anyone connected to your parents' work." Olivia felt a wave of fear wash over her. "What does that mean? What are they going to do to us?" "I don't know," Diane admitted, her voice thick with worry. "But we're not going to let them get you. Not now. Not ever." Olivia felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at her adoptive mother. She wanted to believe Diane, but something inside her told her that no matter how hard they tried to run, they wouldn't be able to escape this. The syndicate was too powerful, and they were getting closer. Suddenly, the distant sound of a car engine cut through the quiet. Olivia's heart skipped a beat as she strained to hear. The engine was unmistakable. It was coming their way. Someone was following them. Someone had found them. "They're here," Diane whispered urgently. "We need to move." Without another word, they turned and ran, the trees flying past them as they pushed deeper into the forest. Olivia's legs burned. Her chest felt tight, but she kept running. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew that stopping wasn't an option. As they moved through the forest, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being surrounded. The sounds of the night seemed to grow louder. Crunching leaves, distant voices, the unmistakable sound of boots pounding on the ground. They weren't alone. Diane pulled Olivia into a small clearing, hiding them behind a thick cluster of trees. They crouched low, trying to stay as still as possible, their breathing loud in their own ears. Olivia held her breath as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. She could hear voices now, low and menacing, but she couldn't make out the words. Her heart raced in her chest, and she realized, with a sickening jolt, that they were about to be caught. And just as she thought she could take no more, a flash of movement in the trees caught her eye. Someone was there, someone coming straight toward them. "Stay down," Diane hissed, grabbing Olivia's arm. But it was too late. The figure emerged from the shadows, and Olivia's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't one of the syndicate. It was someone she knew, someone she hadn't seen in years. And the truth about everything she thought she knew was about to come crashing down.